Jim was in the middle of recording his confession for the Miami trial when he realized his lawyer's face had gone completely white. He stopped speaking. The tape kept rolling. What happened next left one person speechless for 18 years. September 14th, 1970, a private recording studio in West Hollywood. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of career-ending consequences. Jim had spent the morning drinking whiskey, trying to find courage for what he was about to do. His lawyer, Max Fink, had begged him not to record this. The Miami Obscenity trial was still ongoing. They just performed Roadhouse Blues, Light My Fire, and Love Her Madly at the Isle of Wight Festival 3 weeks earlier, pretending everything was fine. But what none of them knew was that Jim had already written down an address on the envelope, an address he'd memorized wrong, an address that would send this confession tape to a stranger's mailbox instead of the Miami courthouse. Sitting in the control booth was Michael Chen, a 22-year-old recording assistant, working his first month in professional studios. Michael had just moved to Los Angeles from Chicago. His brother David had died in Vietnam 3 months earlier. Michael was barely holding himself together. "I'm guilty of everything they say," Jim's voice came through the speakers. Michael's hands were shaking on the soundboard. His brother David had loved the Doors. "This tape is the only thing David would have wanted me to protect," Michael whispered to himself as he watched Jim seal the envelope with the wrong address written across it. Jim handed the envelope to Michael and said, "Mail this tomorrow." Michael never did. If you want to discover the secrets that never made it to trial, the tapes that vanished, and the truth behind rock's greatest legal battles, subscribe now. These stories were buried for decades. The confession tape sat in Michael Chen's apartment for 9 months before Jim Morrison died. Michael had left the studio that September afternoon with the sealed envelope, Morrison's handwriting visible through the manila paper, the address scrawled in shaky letters. The envelope was addressed to 1642 North Dade Boulevard, Miami. The actual Dade County Courthouse was at 1351 Northwest 12th Street. Morrison had confused 2 addresses, mixing his Miami hotel number with the boulevard name near the courthouse. Michael told himself he'd correct the address and mail it the next day. Then the next day became the next week. By the time Michael admitted he was never going to mail that tape, Morrison had already been convicted on September 20th, 1970. 6 months hard labor, $500 fine. His lawyers filed an appeal. The confession tape that would have destroyed any chance of appeal sat in Michael's closet, between his brother's military medals and a stack of Doors albums. Michael couldn't explain why he kept it. Through the studio monitors, he'd heard Morrison say, "I'm guilty of everything they say. I exposed myself. I used profanity. I incited the crowd. And I'm not sorry. I wanted to push boundaries. I wanted to see how far I could go before they stopped me. Well, they stopped me. And I'll take my punishment like a man." 23 seconds before Max Fink physically pushed Morrison away from the microphone, but Morrison had kept talking. 6 more minutes, all of it recorded, all of it sealed in that envelope with the wrong address. On July 3rd, 1971, Jim Morrison was found dead in a Paris bathtub. Michael heard the news on the radio and pulled over on Sunset Boulevard. He cried for 2 hours, not just for Morrison, but for David, for every young man dying too soon, for every sealed envelope carrying confessions that would never be delivered. The tape wasn't just a confession anymore. It was evidence. It was history. And Michael had kept it from its destination, whether that destination was really the courthouse or somewhere else entirely. Michael moved back to Chicago, became an accountant, married, had 2 kids. The tape came with him, always hidden, always there. For 18 years, from 1971 to 1989, Michael Chen lived with the burden of a confession no one else had heard. Until 1989, when he lost his job during a recession. His marriage was falling apart. His son needed college money. And the tape suddenly represented a solution. Michael contacted Heritage Auctions in Dallas. He sent them a 1-minute excerpt. Their experts confirmed Morrison's voice, dated the tape stock to 1970, verified everything. Heritage scheduled the auction for November 18, 1989. Lot 247, Jim Morrison confession tape. Estimated value, $50,000 to $75,000. The catalog description was careful but clear. This tape contained evidence that Morrison admitted guilt, that his appeal had been based on a lie. Ann Morrison, Jim's sister, found out 4 days before the auction. She called Heritage on November 14th and demanded the tape be withdrawn. Heritage refused. On November 16th, Ann's lawyer filed an emergency injunction. The court granted a temporary restraining order. Lot 247 was pulled 90 minutes before bidding. Michael Chen walked away with nothing except a legal summons. The court battle lasted 6 months. Ann argued Morrison intended the tape for the courthouse. Michael had interfered. Therefore, it belonged to the estate. Michael's lawyer argued Morrison gave him possession. Intention was irrelevant. 18 years gave Michael clear title. On May 3, 1990, the judge sided with Ann Morrison. The tape was ordered turned over within 30 days. Michael complied on May 28th. Ann's lawyer placed it in safe deposit box 7841 at Bank of America on Wilshire Boulevard. Ann told reporters the family would never release it publicly, that Morrison's confession was private. And for 15 years, the tape sat unheard, slowly degrading. Then came the fire. August 12, 2005, 3:47 a.m., Bank of America on Wilshire Boulevard. Suspicious circumstances. The vault survived, but water and smoke damage destroyed 40% of safe deposit contents. Box 7841 was among the damaged. When Ann opened it 3 weeks later, the Morrison confession tape was a melted blob of magnetic material fused to charred plastic, completely unrecoverable. Audio experts tried for 6 months. They failed. The confession was gone forever. Ann immediately suspected arson. She believed someone deliberately destroyed the tape to protect Morrison's legacy or eliminate evidence. The FBI investigated. Official conclusion: electrical malfunction. Accidental. But Ann never believed it. She spent the last 8 years of her life insisting the tape had been deliberately destroyed. She never proved it. But here's what Ann Morrison never knew. Michael Chen revealed it in a 2018 interview just before his death from cancer. Michael had made a copy of the confession tape in 1971, right after Morrison died. When he handed the original to Ann's lawyer in 1990, he kept the copy. And that copy still existed. Michael had it when he gave his final interview, though he refused to let anyone hear it, refused to reveal where it was hidden. Some confessions need to stay confessed, Michael said. Jim wanted that tape sent somewhere. He wrote the wrong address. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't. But I've spent 47 years protecting what Jim said that day, and I'm not stopping now. Michael Chen died September 8, 2018, exactly 48 years after recording Morrison's confession. He took the location of the copy to his grave. His son Thomas received a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it until 2043, 72 years after Morrison's death. The envelope supposedly contains the location of the tape copy. Thomas has honored his father's wishes. The envelope sits in a Chicago safety deposit box. It will remain unopened for another 19 years. So the question remains, did Morrison write the wrong address by mistake, or did he deliberately sabotage his own confession? Morrison was drunk. He'd been drinking throughout the trial. Mixing up addresses seems plausible. Max Fink believed Morrison genuinely intended to mail it to the courthouse, that Morrison was self-destructive enough to want to confirm his guilt and be done with it. But Morrison was also a poet, a strategist who understood ambiguity. Writing the wrong address meant the confession would go to some random person who might do anything except deliver it. And if Morrison wanted it destroyed, why record it at all? Unless the entire thing was theater. Unless Morrison was creating a relic, a mystery that would outlive him. The strongest evidence for deliberate sabotage comes from Morrison's final words to Michael that afternoon. Michael mentioned it in his 2018 interview. Morrison looked at the sealed envelope and said something like, "Wrong address, right person." Michael thought Morrison was just drunk. But, looking back, he wondered if Morrison was telling him that even though the address was wrong, the tape was going exactly where Morrison wanted, not the courthouse. But to Michael, a random assistant who would protect it, make sure it survived, but never reached its supposed destination. If that's correct, Morrison's confession was never meant to be a confession. It was meant to be a time capsule, a sealed message to the future. Morrison knew he was creating legend. Every move from 1968 onward was calculated to build mythology. The Miami incident, the trial, the escape to Paris, the death in a bathtub, all of it theatrical, designed for maximum mystery. Why would the confession be different? Thomas Chen is tempted to open the envelope early to end the speculation. But he's honored his father's wishes. 2043 is 19 years away. By then, everyone who knew Morrison personally will be dead. Everyone who attended Miami will be dead. Maybe that's what Morrison wanted, a confession released into a world with no living memory of the crime. The Morrison confession tape is evidence that exists and doesn't exist simultaneously. As long as the copy remains hidden, Morrison is both guilty and innocent, self-destructive and strategic, honest and manipulative. That ambiguity is more powerful than any definitive answer. Morrison wasn't interested in being understood. He was interested in being remembered. And you can't stop thinking about someone who leaves questions instead of answers, mysteries instead of facts, wrong addresses instead of confessions. Jim Morrison didn't mail his confession to the wrong address. He mailed it exactly where it needed to go, into legend, into mystery, into the one place where it could never be forgotten and never be resolved.